The outpost stood in the quiet reaches of the alien kingdom, far from the bustling cities and the political intrigues of the royal courts. It was a small, fortified place where humans and aliens coexisted, but the people here knew that peace was fragile. This place, like the galaxy itself, was filled with dangers, unknown and unpredictable. Among the humans stationed here was Sergeant James, an ordinary soldier with an extraordinary sense of duty. James had always been a protector at heart. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, but he did his job well. He had been assigned to this post to keep the peace, to maintain order among the human and alien citizens living here. He didn't mind the solitude, the quiet days, and the simple routine. But deep down, he had always dreamed of something more, something beyond the fences of the outpost, something that would call for real bravery. On one seemingly normal day, James's life was changed forever. A group of high-ranking officials from the royal family were arriving at the outpost for a diplomatic mission. There was tension in the air, the kind of nervous energy that only accompanies significant events. James had been assigned as part of the security team, keeping a careful watch on the proceedings. The alien royalty were different from humans in many ways. Their customs, their way of life, and even their sense of honor were alien to James. Yet, there was something about them, especially the Queen, that fascinated him. She was a striking figure, regal and composed, with an air of authority that left little room for disagreement. Her child, a young boy no older than 10, was always by her side. The boy's bright, curious eyes and the innocence that shone from him reminded James of his younger siblings back home. The mission was meant to be peaceful. Talks had been set in motion to solidify trade agreements, allowing both human and alien civilizations to benefit. But as the delegates met in the grand hall of the outpost, a sudden attack shattered the calm. Gunshots rang out, and the peaceful atmosphere turned into chaos. James reacted instinctively. He rushed toward the sounds of violence, heart racing. He knew that the safety of the Queen and her child was now in danger. His mind flashed to all the training he had received over the years, the countless hours spent preparing for moments like this. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen. As James reached the courtyard where the Queen and her child were positioned, he saw the enemy. A small band of armed rebels had infiltrated the outpost, and they were firing at the royal family with deadly precision. The Queen's guards had already engaged, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Without thinking, James threw himself between the Queen's child and an incoming shot. The impact was hard and sudden, a sharp pain lancing through his side. The force of the hit sent him tumbling, but he managed to shield the boy with his own body. As the rebel forces pressed forward, James used every last ounce of strength to protect the child, keeping him safe from the bullets that now flew in every direction. His body took the brunt of the attack, but his mind was focused only on the child. The sounds of gunfire, the shouts of his comrades faded into the background as James clung to the boy, urging him to stay down, to remain quiet. He could feel his strength waning, his vision blurring as the pain grew more intense. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the attack was over. The remaining rebels were either dead or captured, and the chaos slowly began to calm. James's body, however, was not so quick to recover. He had taken several hits and the blood was starting to pool around him, soaking into his uniform. The boy, still trembling with fear, looked up at him, wide-eyed, and James gave him a weak smile. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his voice sounded far away even to him. The child clung to him, his small hands grasping at James's fatigues as though afraid that if he let go, the world would fall apart again. The Queen arrived just as James began to lose consciousness. She knelt beside him, her face a mask of worry and gratitude. "You saved him," she said softly, her voice filled with awe and something more. James could barely focus, but he managed to look up at her. Her eyes were not the cold, distant eyes of a ruler. They were the eyes of a mother who had just seen her son spared from death because of the sacrifice of a stranger. But James's body was giving out. The pain was too much. Before he could say anything more, he felt the darkness creeping in, his vision fading, When he awoke, he was in a royal chamber far from the battle. The familiar hum of the medical equipment around him told him he had been treated, probably saved. His side ached and his head throbbed. But there was a strange comfort in the quiet. A soft voice called his name, and he turned his head to see the Queen standing at the door, her expression unreadable. The child was standing beside her, looking at James with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You're awake," the Queen said, her voice calm, yet with an edge of something else. "You saved my son." There was a pause, a heavy silence hanging in the air. "You saved us both." James tried to sit up, but the pain stopped him. The Queen stepped closer, her gaze intense. "You are not just a soldier, James. You have proven yourself to be something more." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. James had never thought of himself as anything more than an ordinary soldier, but in that moment, he realized that the choice he had made, to shield the Queen's child, had changed everything, and perhaps, just perhaps, it had changed him too. James slowly recovered from his injuries, but the pain in his side never fully left. He spent several weeks in the Queen's palace, receiving care from the royal medical staff. The chambers where he was confined were luxurious, nothing like the simple quarters he had been used to. The walls were decorated with elaborate tapestries, and the windows looked out over a beautiful, expansive garden that seemed to stretch on forever. The Queen had made it clear that she was personally overseeing his recovery. She would visit him daily, bringing fresh fruit, flowers, or sometimes just a warm smile. James had expected her to be distant, cold even, considering the vast difference in their statuses, but she was nothing like he imagined. Her presence was calm and composed, yet there was an undeniable softness to her that James hadn't expected. She was a queen, yes, and her authority was apparent in every word she spoke. But in those private moments when they talked, it was clear that there was more to her than the political figure the galaxy knew. As days passed, their conversations grew longer. At first, they were about simple things: the weather, the state of the royal gardens, or the latest developments in the kingdom. But over time, they moved on to more personal topics. James learned that the Queen's name was Nira, and though she had been born into royalty, she had always felt the weight of the crown. She shared stories of her childhood, of the pressures placed on her, and how she had always struggled to live up to the expectations of her people. James, in return, spoke of his life before the military, how he had grown up on Earth in a small town where everyone knew everyone's name. He spoke of his family, his younger siblings, and the love he had for them. Nira listened with great interest, her eyes always focused on him as though she were hanging on to every word. It was strange, he thought. Here was a queen, one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy, listening to him as though he were someone important. During these talks, James began to understand the loneliness that came with her position. Though she had many advisors and attendants, Nira often felt isolated. She couldn't form close friendships because she never knew who might be using her for political gain. Every relationship was shadowed by the weight of her royal duties. James couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for her. She had the world at her feet, but in many ways she was bound by it. Her duty, her position, and the expectations of her people had built a wall around her heart, one that she couldn't easily tear down. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the palace gardens bathed in soft golden light, Nira sat beside James on the balcony. He was still recovering, though he was well enough to sit up and talk for long periods of time. "I never imagined I'd find someone like you here," Nira said quietly, staring out over the garden. "Someone who isn't trying to gain something from me." James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Nira turned to face him, her expression serious. "Most people who come to the palace want something: land, wealth, power. They're all looking to secure their future, to make alliances. But you saved my son without expecting anything in return. You risked your life for someone you didn't even know." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I did what anyone would have done," he said, trying to downplay it. "The boy needed help. I was just in the right place at the right time." Nira shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You don't understand, James. The people I know. They would have expected something in return. A favor. A promise. But you didn't ask for anything. You simply did what was right. Her words made James uncomfortable. He had always seen himself as just a soldier, doing his job. To him, it wasn't about heroism or rewards. It was about survival and protecting the innocent. But Naira's words lingered in his mind, making him think about the true nature of his actions. Over the next few days, the bond between them deepened. It wasn't just about the physical healing, it was about the emotional healing that both of them needed. James had been wounded in battle, but so had Naira. Her wounds were not visible to the eye, but they were just as deep. She had been carrying the burden of leadership, of isolation, for years. Perhaps that was why, in this quiet, peaceful moment, she felt drawn to him. One evening, as James sat by the window, gazing out at the stars, Naira came to visit him. She looked different that night, her royal attire replaced by something more casual. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she looked for the first time like a woman, not a queen. She had always been graceful, but now she seemed more human. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, standing by the door. "For everything." James turned, meeting her gaze. "You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone would have done." Naira stepped closer, her eyes not leaving his. "No, you don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my child, you saved us both, and now I find myself thinking about you in a way I never thought I would." James's heart raced as he realized what she was saying. He had tried to keep his distance, not wanting to complicate things. She was the queen, he was just a soldier. But here she was, standing in front of him, expressing feelings he hadn't expected. James started, but his words faltered. "I don't know what to say." Naira smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You don't have to say anything. I think I already know." The silence between them stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. James felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about duty or politics anymore. This was about two people, connected, in a way they hadn't planned, drawn together by something deeper than they had expected. As Naira turned to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at him. "Thank you, James," she said quietly, before walking away, leaving James to contemplate what had just happened. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Though James had physically healed from his wounds, the emotional scars lingered. The connection he had formed with Queen Naira was undeniable, but both of them knew the gravity of their situation. She was the queen, bound by duty and responsibility. He was a soldier, just a man with no claim to the royal life. Yet, every time they spoke, every glance exchanged, it was clear that something had shifted between them. James tried to focus on his duties as a soldier, but the tension in the air was hard to ignore. The political landscape around them was growing, increasingly unstable. Whispers of rebellion had reached the palace, and the peace that had once felt so secure now seemed fragile. Naira was under constant pressure from her advisors to take more drastic measures to ensure the stability of the kingdom. She was caught between the needs of her people and her own personal desires, and that weighed heavily on her. James, ever the protector, could see the strain on her. The queen had always been strong, but he could see the cracks in her armor. She didn't confide in anyone else the way she confided in him. They spent hours together, talking about the kingdom's troubles, about the political unrest that seemed to be brewing in every corner of the galaxy. One evening, Naira invited James to a private dinner, just the two of them. It was rare for her to have such moments of privacy, and James understood that this was her way of trying to find some peace amidst the chaos. They sat across from each other in a beautifully decorated dining hall, but neither of them was focused on the meal before them. Their conversation was far more important than the food. "The council is pressuring me to take action," Naira said, her voice laced with frustration. "They want me to send troops to quell the uprising before it spreads any further. But I don't know if that's the right course. It could lead to more bloodshed, and that's not something I want to be responsible for." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Sometimes doing nothing feels like the hardest choice, but it might be the best one. If you act in haste, it could make things worse. People will die. Naira's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away. She was the queen, but in that moment she was just a woman, seeking advice from someone she trusted. "I feel so alone in this," she confessed quietly. "No one understands the pressure I'm under. Everyone wants something from me, my advisors, my people, even my family. But I just want peace. I want to do what's right." James reached across the table, his hand brushing hers in a gesture of comfort. He didn't say anything at first, not because he didn't know what to say, but because there were no words that could ease the burden she carried. His hand lingered on hers, and Naira didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the moment to pass in silence, both of them feeling the weight of the connection that had been building between them. "I wish I could help you," James said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "But all I can do is offer what advice I can, and I'll stand by you in whatever decision you make." Naira gave him a small, grateful smile, but there was sadness in her eyes. "You've already done so much for me. You saved my son. You've been here for me when no one else has. I don't know what I would have done without you." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken feelings. James knew that he had no right to feel the way he did about her. She was the queen, and he was just a soldier. Yet, in her eyes, he saw something that made his heart beat faster, something he had never expected to find, something that made him believe that maybe, just maybe, their worlds weren't as far apart as they seemed. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for a brief moment, they were able to forget the troubles that awaited them. They laughed together, their voices filling the quiet room, and James found himself lost in the warmth of her presence. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to remind him that there was more to life than duty and war. The next few days were tense. James could sense the growing unrest in the kingdom. There were rumors of protests, of factions within the royal court pushing for action. The Queen's advisors were becoming more vocal in their demands for a swift and forceful response. Naira, however, remained conflicted. She was torn between her desire for peace and the pressure from those around her to take action. James couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He knew that the Queen's position was precarious. If she made the wrong decision, it could tear the kingdom apart. But he also knew that she couldn't do it alone. She needed someone she could trust, someone who would stand by her no matter what. One evening, as they sat together in the royal garden, the calm evening air carrying the scent of blooming flowers, Naira spoke again of the rebellion. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice soft but filled with frustration. "The people are angry and I can't blame them. The galaxy is a hard place and sometimes it feels like I'm caught in the middle of it all." James leaned forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. "You've got more allies than you realize, and no matter what happens, I'll be by your side." For a moment there was silence between them, and then Naira turned to face him, her expression softening. "You don't have to do this for me," she said quietly. "You've already done so much." But James shook his head. "It's not just about what I've done for you. It's about what we can do together. We're stronger when we're united." Naira didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if weighing his words. Then, without saying a word, she took his hand in hers, the gesture speaking volumes more than any words could. In that simple, quiet moment, something shifted between them. The bond they had forged in the face of danger had only grown stronger, and as they sat together in the garden, the distant sounds of unrest fading into the background, both of them knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The tension in the palace grew as the days passed, and James could feel it in the air. The unrest in the kingdom was becoming more pronounced, and the pressure on Queen Naira was mounting. She had always carried the weight of her responsibilities with grace, but lately, the constant demands from her advisors, her people, and her family had begun to take a toll on her. James could see it in her eyes, the exhaustion, the doubt. He knew she was struggling to make the right decision for her people. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Naira asked James to join her in her private chambers. It was rare for them to have any time alone, and James knew that this invitation was significant. When he entered, Naira was sitting by the window, staring out at the darkening sky, her expression distant. The room was quiet, but the weight of what she was about to say hung in the air. "James," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I have made my decision." James looked at her, waiting for her to continue. He had known for a while that she had been contemplating something, but he hadn't expected her to speak so openly about it. There was no fear in her voice, only determination. "I have been thinking long and hard about what's best for the kingdom," Naira continued, her eyes meeting his. "And I have decided to act. I cannot allow this rebellion to continue unchecked. The people need to know that their queen will protect them, no matter the cost." James's heart sank. He had feared that this would be her choice, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. He knew that Naira was a wise and just ruler, but he also knew the consequences of war. Blood would be shed and many innocent lives would be lost. "I understand, Your Majesty," James said, his voice steady. "But please remember, not all solutions come through force. I know you want peace, but sometimes we must look beyond what's right in front of us and find another way." Naira's expression softened and she stepped closer to him. "I know," she whispered, "but I can't sit idly by while my people suffer. I have to do what's necessary." James nodded, though a heavy feeling settled in his chest. He knew that he couldn't change her mind, not when she had made up her mind with such certainty. But there was one thing he could do: support her, no matter the cost. The next morning, Naira made her public declaration. The news spread quickly across the kingdom and the royal court was thrown into turmoil. Her advisors were divided. Some supported her decision, while others feared that the consequences would be dire. The common people, too, had mixed reactions. Some cheered her on, believing she was taking a stand for justice. Others feared that war would bring even more suffering. But Naira stood firm in her decision. She was no longer just a queen who ruled from afar. She was a queen who would stand with her people, even if it meant facing unimaginable challenges. As the days passed, James stood by Naira's side. He was no longer just a soldier, he had become her confidant, her protector, and her closest ally. Together they faced the storm that was brewing within the kingdom, knowing that their bond would be tested in ways they had never imagined. The kingdom was on the brink of war. Naira's decision had set the wheels of action into motion, and now there was no turning back. James could feel the tension growing with every passing day. The city streets were filled with whispers of rebellion, and the royal army began to mobilize. The air was thick with uncertainty, and everywhere James went, he saw the fear in people's eyes. But through it all, Naira remained resolute. She had made her choice and she would not waver. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. The Queen's leadership was being tested in ways she had never anticipated, and James was by her side, offering his support and guidance every step of the way. As the day of battle drew near, James found himself struggling with conflicting emotions. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight and protect, but this felt different. He wasn't fighting for a cause he could clearly define. He was fighting to protect the Queen, to stand by her side as she faced the consequences of her decisions. And as much as he respected Naira, he couldn't shake the feeling that war was not the answer. One evening, as they stood together on the palace balcony looking out over the city, Naira turned to James, her face serious. "James," she said quietly, "if this goes badly, if I don't make it out of this alive, will you promise me something?" James's heart skipped a beat. The thought of losing Naira, after everything they had been through, was almost too much to bear. But he nodded, his gaze steady. "What is it?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. "Promise me you will protect my son," Naira said, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "Promise me that you will make sure he grows up knowing what it means to be a good ruler. He is the future of this kingdom, and I need to know that he will be safe no matter what happens." Tears welled in James's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He couldn't imagine a world without Nira, but he knew that if the worst happened, he would do everything in his power to honor her wish. "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will protect him, Your Majesty. I swear it." The days that followed were filled with preparations for war. The royal army was ready, and Nira's forces began to march. James stood beside her, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the path ahead would be dangerous and uncertain, but he also knew that no matter what happened, he would always stand by her side. The first battle was a brutal one. The rebels fought fiercely, but Nira's forces were stronger. James fought alongside the Queen's soldiers, his training and experience guiding him through the chaos. The clash of weapons, the cries of the wounded, and the smoke of battle filled the air. But through it all, James kept his focus on Nira, knowing that his primary duty was to protect her. As the battle raged on, James found himself face to face with an enemy leader. The two men locked eyes, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The rebel leader charged at James, and they clashed in a brutal fight. But in the end, it was James who emerged victorious, his training and skill proving to be more than a match for the rebel. When the battle finally ended and the dust settled, the Queen's forces had won, but it had come at a great cost. Many lives had been lost, and the kingdom was left to pick up the pieces. Nira, though victorious, was not triumphant. She had done what she thought was necessary, but the cost of war weighed heavily on her heart. Into the aftermath. Nira looked out over the battlefield, her heart filled with both relief and sorrow. She had won, but at what cost? She had chosen the path of war, and now she would have to live with the consequences. James stood by her, his hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. It had been a hard-fought victory, but it had also marked the beginning of a new era for the kingdom, one that would require strength, wisdom, and the unity of its people to rebuild. And with James by her side, Nira knew that she wasn't alone in this journey.